Good morning. My name is Will Landers. I'm president here of the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here today to this amazing event. It's a great honor and privilege for us to welcome you to the 2024 Economic Conference, proudly organized by the Chamber, as well as in partnership with the Brazil-Texas Chamber of Commerce. This event, which has become one of the cornerstones of our annual programming, coincides with the IMF World Bank meetings, and it provides an invaluable platform for us all to reflect on the critical economic developments in Brazil and explore new opportunities for collaboration between Brazil and the United States. We gather at a time of great transformation and possibility in the global economy. Brazil's evolving landscape, fueled by vast natural resources, technological innovation, and resilient industries, offers remarkable potential for growth, trade, and investment. This year, our initial panel will offer an update on Brazil's economic and political outlook, moderated by my fellow board members Paulo Vieira da Cunha and Drauzio Giacomelli. After a short coffee break, Carlos Lacerda from Bratec will moderate a panel on the opportunities in Brazil's energy sector. Of course, I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to our hosts here at White & Case, welcoming us here to this great space, and also thank very much our tireless staff at the Chamber for organizing another great event.
Thank you, Will, for the warm reception. We just flew in from Texas, and you can imagine it's nice to get out of the heat and the humidity for a couple of days. It is cooling down in Texas, but when we talk about the economy, when we talk about the business environment, it's really a hot mess down in Texas. It's growing very quickly. We're very excited about all the things happening in Texas and in the southern region. Will, I'd like to thank you so much for your generous support, your collaboration, your help in bringing our two chambers together. I want to also recognize Fernanda for putting together a fantastic event today. Today in attendance we have a couple of our members here. Thank you, Mr. Azevedo. Thank you, Fernando, and thank you again, Will, for your generous support.
Welcome. Good morning. It's really a pleasure to be with you all here today. I would like also to thank White & Case for such a wonderful reception for us. The Brazilian economy continues to defy adverse expectations. 2023 was better than expected, and 2024 will likely follow suit with growth exceeding 3%. In 2023, the outcome was driven by commodity exports. In 2024, it is driven by domestic demand, with growing incomes, near record low unemployment, and even a recovery in investment. Meanwhile, another round of municipal and local elections, still ongoing, has been a victory for the electoral institutions and democracy. We observed an efficient, impartial, and recognized electoral process. While the rise of the alt-right continues to make inroads in Brazil, the outcome showed the strengths of a political middle ground. Yes, this middle ground is opportunistic, patrimonialist, mediocre, and not immune to corruption and manipulation. It is also pragmatic, politically savvy, willing to compromise, and representative of its regional base. The market, however, is unhappy. Fund managers have shifted allocations away from domestic markets. The exception, the profitable investment in very short-term government securities in a period of tightening monetary policy that could bring real rates upwards of 7 to 8% and favor the carry trade, given lower U.S. rates. Lula continues to stumble, firm in his belief that more spending is the answer to any problem. Contemplating the political downfall of his party and frustrated in his ambition to have an influential role in foreign affairs. As many have observed, over the last quarter century, Brazil has successfully established stable monetary and exchange rate regimes, which have supported growth. However, it has yet to implement a sustainable fiscal regime. Lula did not begin this term by clearing the ground for late expansion. Instead, he doubled down, expanding expenditures from the start. As a result, we are at it again. The Ministry of Finance promises cuts while implementing higher taxes, and doing nothing about a fiscal structure where the federal government spends 20% of GDP, not counting the 10% it pays on its debt, yet upwards of 90% of expenditure is predetermined by outdated, inequitable, and misdirected constitutional and otherwise binding rules of the game.
I think this table summarizes an important point that Paulo was talking about just a few minutes ago. Here we see that in the last 4 years, growth has persistently outperformed expectations by significant amounts. I mean, the average deviation from the expectations at the end of the previous year was 1.9 percentage points. So I think that an important question that arises at this point is what is behind this outperformance in the last few years, and different explanations have very different implications for the outlook moving forward. I will discuss 3 possible explanations. They are not exclusive. The first is positive supply shocks. The second, structural reforms, which would be raising potential growth. And finally, expansionary policies driving an acceleration of growth. And I will argue that we probably have a combination of these 3 factors, and I will discuss the implications moving forward. So on positive supply shocks, I think that definitely they played a role, particularly last year. The agricultural sector had an exceptionally positive year. The grain crop increased more than 20%. The agricultural GDP increased more than 15%, which is the largest expansion in more than 30 years. The agricultural sector itself accounts for only 7% of overall GDP, but I would say that this shock probably had indirect implications, also positive. In particular, there was a sizable improvement in the balance of payments, and that was positive for the real. In addition to that, of course, we had an increase in supply of food and lower food prices, and with lower inflation, the central bank was able to cut rates more quickly. So I would say that the overall impact on the economy was probably quite significant. So that was an important story for last year. On structural reforms and acceleration of potential growth, I also think that we have had some positive developments since 2017. I would highlight 3 in particular that I think are very positive for the economy. First, the deleveraging of public banks, the reduction of subsidies on loans by BNDES, and as a consequence of that, we had fostering of private capital markets and certainly more efficiency on the allocation of resources. Second, the labor reform that was approved back in 2017. At this point, we have more evidence that it was a very effective reform, reduction on litigation, and probably it is possible now it's possible now for the economy to operate with somewhat lower unemployment rates. Finally, the tax reform. I mean, last time I was here back in 2023, we were discussing the reform which was approved in Congress. We are now discussing in Congress the complementary laws that should be approved by the end of this year. The impact of this reform will materialize with relatively long legs. But I think it's a very important reform that we also reduce significantly the litigation and improve the allocation of resources in the economy. Its impact will materialize with long legs, but it was certainly a very important milestone for the economy. So I do think we have some positive developments on the structural side of the economy in the last few years. Finally, yes, fiscal policies, as Paulo said, have been enormously expansionary in the last few years. And what is interesting is that Lula in his current term is in a way defying the usual political business cycle, right? In general, a new administration starts cleaning up the house, making adjustments, adopting more restrictive fiscal policies, and then in the second half of a presidential term, you usually have more expansionary policies looking at the next electoral cycle. That was not the choice of this administration. We had very expansionary policies last year and again this year. Federal spending increased 12% in real terms last year and about 7% this year. And of course, this had positive implications for short-term growth.
First, thanks for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to be here. And I guess, a good way to touch, this deal is to put Brazil in perspective and compare what's happening in the rest of the world. We see the major central banks cutting rates right now, and we see Brazil hiking rates. And when you look at, at the numbers, actually, you might think, well, probably Brazil has a very loose monetary policy. And when you look at it, the 1 year real interest rate in Brazil, real, has been above 7%, since 2022. And in the past was high too, but during COVID was extremely low and have been above 7% since 2022. So that's an extremely high level of interest rates. So here's the puzzle. So I think Alexandre already told a little bit of the end of the story, but where is the puzzle there? I worked many years with Paulo Guedes, and he liked to say that Brazil runs the marathon wearing iron shoes, because rates are so high and yet Brazil grows significantly. So we see the year after COVID, Brazil grew 4.5%, 22 grew 3%, 23 3%, 24 we are heading to 3% again, despite these extremely high interest rates. So we have nice stories and bad stories there. So after COVID was relatively easy, a lot of idle capacity. Then we had a very significant recovery in trade balance in Brazil. Trade balance had been around 40 to 50 billion forever. And in 2023 and 24, we saw trade balance moving from around 50 billion per year to almost 100 billion per year. So that was a health side of it. Part of this is the good agricultural crop. Part of it is the oil production that increased significantly, and we're going to talk about that in the following panel. But in 24 we see the crop not doing so great. Trade balance that reached more than 100 billion now is about 85 billion. So that's not doing the trick. So why is Brazil growing so much in 24? And I think 100% of this is fiscal policy, as Alexandre was mentioning. So when the Lula government took office, federal government expenditures were at 18% of GDP, and we have this constitutional amendment allowing for the first year of Lula's government to expend an additional 2% of GDP on top of the budget. So that allowed a very significant increase in the first year. Not in the first half of the year, because people take time, to sit in their seats and learn where the buttons are. But in the second half of 23, almost this 2% of GDP was spent very quickly. In 24, this year, we had elections in October, so the government tried to front load the budget. So, for example, precatórios, these court-mandated bonds, they were paid almost fully, the 100 billion, again, 1% of GDP in the first quarter of the year. So if you add, the last year we had almost a 3% additional on top of the budget, additional expenditure being spent. So what this tells us that the budget, which was the expenditure side of it, which was 18% of GDP, jumped to 22% of GDP. So that was why is Brazil growing so much this year? Because of a very significant increase in a short period of time of the government expenditures.
Let me get a different point of view, the point of view of the Central Bank of Brazil. So why are we, as the Central Bank of Brazil, why are they increasing rates if we can actually foresee that there's large fiscal boosts that are going to become a fiscal drag in the near future? And the way I see the story that I tell myself is that they made exactly the same mistake of believing that there will be a fiscal drag in August 2023 when they decide to start an easing cycle. So the story that we had at this point was we had what we call the constitutional amendment called kamikaze in the end of Bolsonaro's government, where it made the spending cap more flexible, and then we had the constitutional amendment of the transition. That's what Carlos described, that introduced a large amount of government expenditure in the beginning of 2023. After that, the new government introduced the fiscal rules that they decided they were going to follow, what they call the new fiscal framework. And if it was followed closely, it would have been a very substantial decrease in the rate of real government growth. But then we realized that there were a bunch of exceptions, a bunch of things that you could anticipate, believing that in the end you're going to decrease. So there was a bunch of stuff that in the end didn't work. So by mid of 2023, inflation was lower in Brazil, mostly due to non-core inflation, things that usually the central bank doesn't take too much into account, like energy, like the tradables, helped by a good exchange rate dynamics, food. So all this stuff was good, and inflation was low. There was a pass-through to core inflation, but activity was still too hot. And the central bank had this view that, well, maybe with the new fiscal framework, with some this real government expenditure will be less strong, and we're gonna have a few quarters to see economic activity softening, and we're gonna be able to ease monetary policy and get to mid 2024 at an interest rate of around 8 or 9, and growing at a little bit below 2%, and inflation very close to the target. Clearly, that was a mistake. Why? Because we never reduced government expenditure. It seemed that what was needed in terms of monetary policy to get you closer to the target was much tighter than what the central bank delivered. And I think the major mistake was the implicit view on how fiscal policy would reform. And by mid 2024, the central bank was exactly at the same point, but in a worse situation. Why? Because all these exogenous components of inflation that were helping a lot were no longer helping. Energy was much higher, food prices were worse, even the tradables were not helping as much. We had, after all these fiscal uncertainty and Lula saying a bunch of things about the central bank, about the inflation targeting regime, inflation expectations really unanchored. In the horizon that is relevant to monetary policy, and even longer horizons. So that's a very unpleasant situation for the central bank. You have everything unanchored, you know for sure that the trade-offs of monetary policy are going to be much worse than they should be. You have a very strong economic activity, and the only thing that you could believe that might help you is exactly the same thing that failed you a year ago. So if you believe that and do not act upon what you're seeing, it seems to be a very reckless position. So that's why they decided to be more on a conservative side and start hiking rates. And see if two things can help. One is this fiscal drag that I described to you, that's a possibility. Second is the world. By the world, I mean the U.S. monetary policy and easing cycle here, which seemed to be coming, but now not so much or not so fast. But on the fiscal drag, you still have you still have the hope that this will help.
I will not waste your time with the history, but this is our recent, since 1982, timeline of politics in Brazil. I would only emphasize 3 milestones. First, the Constitution. It was made in 1988. It was not made in 1988. It was the consequence of several years of evolution of thinking, and some important things were made over there. One of them is to deny and counteract what had happened in the military period. So an important thing was the easy to create political parties. It's written in Constitution, very easy. If you have 500,000 signatures, you can make a political party. So this is a milestone. The first milestone is not so emphasized over there, is the 2017 mini political reform we had in Brazil. As a consequence of the car wash movements, not only the car wash process, but the movement in nation, we had the private financing for elections banned in Brazil. So today, all the financial money for elections come from the public budget, right? And also the money to provide the existence of political parties. There in Bolsonaro government, when he gave the power to Ciro Nogueira as the Minister Chief of Staff, these numbers increased, and today in 2024, we Brazilians spent 11 billion reais with politics and elections in 1 year. It's not a low number. It's significant. But that tends to increase because the budget is provided by the congressman. And there is a perverse cycle today in Brazil. I will not lose your time with the first slide, but the second slide you can see there. These are the parties in the Chamber of Deputies and at the Senate. In the Chamber of Deputies in Brazil today, you have 18 political parties acting. That's true and not so true, because several small parties have no importance at the House. But the first group, the first and second group of parties over there, you can see, mean 300 congressmen out of 513. It's nicknamed Centrão, a collection of political parties. There is the power in Brazil, not in the presidency. It's there. And then you have other parties, etc. In the Senate, it's not so different portrait, but 12 parties are represented. That's the current situation. We just had elections, municipal elections. And then you have, I'll come back in 1 minute. How is it the perverse cycle of politics today? Political parties are not anymore ideological groups defending ideas or defending communities or privileges. No, they fight for money. Money is the aim of the political parties. They became political corporations. Because the money for politics is directly divided, proportionally divided to the number of federal deputies each party has. If I have 7 and he has 3, 70% of the money comes to me and 30% for him, right? These 2024 were the first elections when the cycle acted completely. I am a congressman. He is a mayor. A mayor candidate for re-election, his city. So I, back last year, provided money for him, the mayor. He was re-elected. And then he will be an electoral agent for me in my own re-election within 2 years. This year, traditionally, mayor's candidate for re-election mean approximately 80% are re-elected. This year, we got to 92% re-elected because of money provided freely by the congressman, not by the presidency, because Congress took the budget and they have new means to spend the money. Secret amendments, party amendments, state amendments, and the most important, PIX amendments. Everybody knows what's PIX, right? You take the money from the federal treasury and gives straight to the city, not passing through any other control rates, right? So, what's happening today? Happily, in 2017, back in the mini political reform, we not only gave the money to provide the elections for the public treasury, but we provided some interesting chapters. First is the barrier clause. What's the barrier clause? Tend to diminish the number of parties in steps, 2018, 2022, 26, until 30. Increasing the need for votes and percentages of votes in each state, you tend to reduce the number of parties. I guess, myself, I was a congressman, so it's written over there. I was 12 years a congressman, federal congressman, and after general secretary of a party, etc. So these 18 parties in the Chamber of Deputies will be around 8 parties in 2030. The barrier clause ban low-voted parties. They will merge, they will distinguish, they will do something, but about 80. I could guess which are these 80. These 8. MDB, PP, etc. You have some important persons. Some from right, radical leftists, one from the evangelicals. You see, 8 parties. From here to then, we will have 2 important elections for federal purposes. First is 2026, and the second 2030. Everybody here thinking about investments, watching what happens in the economy, observing central bank measures, etc., is thinking about politics.
Brazil is as close to investment grade as it is to a debt crisis. So, and what can lead Brazil to a debt crisis is what Jose Carlos said. Real rates are very high. They have been very high for very long. And we want to figure out for how long and whether they can come down. So that's why I would like to start with Alexandre, because you talk about growth. And as much as growth has surprised, and again, you look at Brazil, growth has been strong. Inflation compares well versus other EM, and yet rates are super high and the currency is super depreciated, even if the balance of payments are great. So what is going on? But it can be crippling, as I was saying, that I think it goes through this growth rates conflict that we have to solve. And to Alexandre, you painted a constructive view on growth, but we remember the Dilma cycle, and to some extent we are going through a similar cycle, and we know how it ended back then. And I personally think that the risk of a recession over the next couple of years is higher than overheating, but never say never. So what I'd like to ask you is, how do you think these things resolve? Do we see growth eventually yielding to high rates and uncertainty, and therefore rates can go down, or not? We are in this eternal bullish high expenditure cycle that basically lead us to vicious dynamics.
The fundamental point here is that actual growth in the last few years has been much higher than potential. The output gap is now positive, and from an economic perspective, it is necessary to have a substantial deceleration moving forward. And I think it is possible that what you said about a recession, well, I think it's possible in particular if we do not have if the drag on fiscal policy that Tiago and José Carlos were talking about, if this drag does not materialize and we continue to have a lot of tensions between fiscal and monetary policy, we could have a more adverse scenario and eventually a recession materializing, as was the case at the end of Dilma's government. So I would say the base case is a deceleration. It could be more organized and smoother, and if we have more collaboration from fiscal policy. But there is a lot of uncertainty on that point, essentially because, as I said, I think we have a potential collision between the political cycle and the economical cycle. And then from a political perspective, politicians will pursue an acceleration of growth as we get close to the election. From an economic perspective, it is necessary to cool down the economy. So I think that we will continue to have a lot of tensions between fiscal and monetary policy, and if this more restrictive fiscal policy does not materialize, risks will increase and we could have a more adverse scenario.
Okay, Drauzio. As we were discussing yesterday, we are coordinating jokes and stuff. but I was there's one thing I think is interesting about Lula is that actually he said once, it's not his quote, but he said it once, that power you take with the left and play with the right, and he does some crazy things that sometimes he starts just saying the opposite of what he's going to do, because he sort of was, I have nothing to do with that. So a few recent examples. He said, I'm completely against inflation target of 3%. He said that in the day that the Monetary Council was deciding it, and it was decided to be 3%, and not only for 28, but forever. So he said, I'm against it, but he did it for 3% and forever, not every year. And he even changed the measure of it for a moving average, not to the calendar year. So he did much tougher. Then he said, okay, Petrobras will not pay dividends. Petrobras has to spend these dividends to make Brazil grow, invest money, and he paid 100% of dividends. Said Petrobras will not put gasoline price at international prices. We have to pass this advantage to the Brazilians who are the real owners with Magna. They hike prices to put it at international price. So every time he has to turn, to the right, he starts signaling, I have nothing to do with that, but,
Saying these things comes with an enormous cost.
Yes, yeah. There's it seems that I'm talking just to my audience, but you please don't listen to that. But just you guys who are relevant, you listen to that. So, and now he keeps saying that, we will not. Or another example, rates are high because of Roberto Campos was nominated by Bolsonaro. The day I put my guy there, he's gonna lower rates. Now his guy is there, Galípolo, and he's hiking rates, he's defending to hike rates, and Lula is saying nothing. So right now he's saying, I'm not gonna cut expenditures, social and education are not expenditures, are investments. So if the track record holds true, we might see some further cuts in government expenditures.
So light that we could, meaning there's so little involvement in Brazilian markets these days, that if something goes right, we could have the rally of all rallies, as Tiago's big boss said. And I do believe that it could happen if we get a few things right, and I'll turn it over to him. He's been at the central bank and he knows how things work. How do you see rates unfolding? Do we validate what the market is pricing, or do we have see a light in the end of the tunnel as if there's some fiscal consolidation? Could you elaborate on your scenarios?
The hiking cycle will depend a lot on how economic activity will evolve, and that will depend a lot on how government expenditure will grow in the future. But on top of that, we have a transition in the Central Bank of Brazil going on, right? So, and we are learning about this new governor and the new board that will come with the governor. For example, we still have 3 members of the Monetary Policy Committee to be appointed until the end of the year. It's 3 out of 99 votes, so it's a lot. And we have a lot of turnarounds, I would say, in the learning process of the new governor in the last few monetary policy meetings. First, we had this split vote. 5 guys voted to decrease the pace of easing in May, while 4 guys decided to keep the 50 basis cut pace. And that was generated a big turmoil in the markets. So that's a very interesting monetary policy meeting that we had, very unusual. So there was some discussion and uncertainty on how the committee would vote. They took the action of being more hawkish, right? The voting process led to 5 votes for minus 25 and 4 to minus 50. More hawkish. And markets behaved as if it was a dovish decision. Exchange rate depreciated, inflation expectations deteriorated, there was a steepening of the yield curve. Everything went with the wrong sign. And why is that? Because the 5 guys that voted for a more hawkish decision were the old guys, the guys that were appointed by Bolsonaro, that were going to go out at some point. And the 4 guys that voted for the more aggressive cut were the new guys, the guys that were appointed by Lula. So what the market learned is that, well, the future of the central bank is more on the dovish side. And the reaction was as if it was dovish. Right? It's a very good example on how delicate is monetary policy communication and decisions. And then everybody, at that point, we had the new board was with a very low credibility with the markets. And Galípolo learned that, understood that that was an issue, and he actually became the most hawkish member of the Monetary Policy Committee in the last 2 meetings. He was the one pushing for, at least publicly, he was the guy that was clearly pushing for a starting of the hiking cycle. And I think markets took it very well. This change of public signal on Galípolo, the new governor, the markets really seem to have believed, right? If you look, a lot of things deteriorate in the process, but it was not due to this change in position. He actually, when he changed, he became more hawkish. Exchange rate appreciated, the yield curve flattened. Actually, the stock markets performed well. But it's a learning process, right? One thing, and there's this issue. how this change appeared, right? Lula was saying that it was a big mistake. I think he actually mentioned it was a crime to keep rates at 10.5. Imagine hiking it, right? But he, in the end, allowed the guy that pushed for the hiking cycle to begin. He ended up appointing this guy as governor. But is there a limit to this? How's the relation between Lula and the new board? Is there a limit? Is there a promise that at some point they're going to have to ease, or there's nothing, it's completely free? That type of uncertainty we'll learn about it as time goes by, right?
I would like to thank you all. I'd like to extend this. It's been so fun and insightful. I'd like to extend that, but you have a coffee break. I don't want to be in the way of your cookies and coffee, and we have another excellent panel coming. So without ado, thank you very much, and thank you, panelists, for excellent presentations.
I know we have a lot to talk about after that amazing panel, showing all the strengths and challenges that we have ahead with Brazil's economy and politics. I also want to acknowledge a few other board members from the chamber that are here today. Mário from Banco do Brasil, Paulo Ardegui, Dick Aldrich, I just saw him as well, so a few more board members. It's great to have such a strong presence from our board here today. Well, the next panel, before we bring the next panel, I just want to bring Chris Hansen, the partner in charge of Latin America for one case, to say a few words. And again, I think on behalf of everybody, Chris, I want to thank you so much for welcoming us so warmly here. And he already promised that we're good for next year already, guys. So it's all go. Hopefully, we'll still be here. But
hi, everybody. I will keep this very brief. We have a great panel coming up, and I've been accused by some of my friends and colleagues at the firm of taking this Latin America thing to an extreme by arriving an hour late to give my opening remarks. First of all, welcome. It really is a pleasure to have the Brazil Cham here with us again. We're very strong supporters of the vision of the Brazil American Chamber of Commerce, active participants, and I think we greatly benefit from their leadership and assistance. You know, we've been in Sao Paulo since 1997. My good friend and partner Don Baker opened an office. He was an associate at the time, opened an office. Literally it was him and 2 or 3 assistants in the office, and it's grown to one of the best businesses within our firm. It's a very different business model than probably what most of you do, but we have 10 lawyers on the ground in Sao Paulo doing U.S. mostly New York law-based transactions and working closely with their Brazilian colleagues. And it has been, Brazil is probably the best example of a white and case office there is in the world. It's, the quality of the people we have down there, our office staff, it's absolutely amazing, and we're just thrilled to be there and to support this, the efforts to do more business in Brazil. We really value the critical work that the Chamber does in strengthening the ties between Brazil and the international community, not just the U.S. As a key player in the market, we've been there for 30 years, as I said, and we're not going anywhere. We're going to be there for 30 and 50 more. We've witnessed a lot of the social, political, and economic challenges that have gone on in that jurisdiction over the years. Luckily for lawyers, those kind of challenges sometimes result in great opportunities. The rest of you are suffering and the lawyers are doing well. That tends to happen. I get accused sometimes. I live and work in our Mexico City office. I'm based down there, and I have a real affinity for Mexico. I love Mexico, and I'm accused by my partners of being heavily biased towards Mexico, and I'll own up to that. But for us, and I think for the folks in this room, Brazil is the real powerhouse of Latin America. Mexico and Brazil are the two, right? It's always going to be very, very important. It's very close to the U.S., obviously, et cetera, et cetera. But Brazil is the powerhouse. That's where the economic change, where the economic growth and development is going to happen, and we are really happy to be a part of that and poised to take advantage of it. As of all of you, we're very, very bullish on Brazil over the long term. We think about things in, I would say, 20-year increments rather than 5-year. And we just view Brazil as one of the jurisdictions in the world, if not the best jurisdiction in the world for our business going forward. So thank you all for coming. It's great to have you here. I did indeed agree that we will do this again next year here, and I hope we can. I hope you guys will choose us rather than choosing you. And have a great day, and the next panel is going to be awesome, so have a great time. Thanks.
A few opening comments that I would like to make here before we begin the round of questions, and some of them we've already heard a little bit from Roberto about just the overall energy sector. But thinking of a big picture, when you look at Brazil in terms of energy, it ranges anywhere from 7th to 9th, largest in the world, and that is in production of oil and gas. It is in consumption of refined products. It's also in the installed capacity of electric power. And so when Chris mentioned and Roberto mentioned Brazil being a powerhouse, that is really true at a global scale. And in fact, if the projects as planned for exploration and production, if they go forward as planned, Brazil will probably be climbing to perhaps the 5th largest in the world within a decade, and Roberto might be able to answer that even better. So it is a country with opportunity in the energy sector. And as we look at the energy transition, this is even greater in terms of an opportunity because Brazil has a very green footprint today, one of the greenest of all countries in the world, but it has the resources to be able to continue that and even potentially be a global player in that. And with respect to energy transition, what we're starting to see, as mentioned here, is it's not confined to oil and gas. It's now reaching into other sectors like mining, as it relates to critical minerals, the need for infrastructure. And when we talk about biofuels, it even goes into concepts like land use and agribusiness. So at the end of the day, when we look at what fuels our economy, it's a very complex system that you can't really look at it standalone. You have to really think of it in sort of a wholesome viewpoint. Also thinking of energy projects, and that's something that I know in my experience I had when I was working with ExxonMobil, is the fact that these are long-term projects, they're high capex projects, and they require stability. They require stability of contracts, they require strong institutions, and this is something that Brazil always has had, and it's one of the selling points that we have had for oil and gas particularly. Kind of a side note here, because obviously every investment has a risk element to it. And a former CEO once told me, and when I speak about high capex projects, these are $7-8 billion projects. And he was saying, you know, Carla, making a $1 billion decision is not easy. When you make the 5th or the 6th billion dollar decision, it's not easy. But the hardest decision is the 1st or 2nd billion, because that means you're committed. And that means you have to put it all in place and have faith that the elements of that project are going to withstand time. And as we were talking about politics here, the ups and downs of various regimes. So when we're talking about long-term projects, these are 20, 30, 40-year projects that has to withstand many administrations coming and going.
Usually when you do finance and outlooks, you work with scenarios, right? And we do work with lots of scenarios, and we've heard lots of scenarios for economics and politics in the first panel. What I would like you to remember, and have you seen Doctor Strange, the movie? The whole idea of the multiverse? In the end, if you haven't, I'm sorry, because I'm going to give you a spoiler. In the end, he tells his wife, in every universe, I would love you. The message I want to pass you is in every universe, in every scenario you can think of, invest in energy in Brazil. It's a sure deal. So no matter which scenario you're working with, it's still a good bet. Why? Brazilian energy demand will grow by the end of the next decade in the reference case scenario at least 30%. In the low scenario, 20%. In the high case scenario, over 40. So it is if you're aiming for the domestic Brazilian market, it is a good investment. But Brazil is positioning itself is a huge hot spot for the international energy scene, not only on oil and gas, but advanced biofuels, hydrogen, and green products in general. What we do is we look for all those scenarios, short term, middle term, long term. So 5 years, 10-year plan, and a 30-year plan. I'm going to give you some numbers for our 10-year plan, so a 10-year horizon up until 2034. Up to 2034, only to supply the Brazilian market in the reference case, we foresee a need of at least 3.5 trillion reais of investments in all energy sectors. Most of it oil and gas, of course, because of the sheer size of the numbers of oil and gas. So 2 trillion reais in oil and gas, exploration and production, mainly FPSOs. You may or may not know that Brazil is the main buyer of FPSOs in the world. We will have, by the end of the 10-year scenario, so up until 2034, we will have 28 new FPSOs operating in Brazil. 13 are already contracted, 15 are yet to be contracted. So huge money, lots of opportunities in this particular sector.
Eloisa, may I just explain what is an FPSO? An FPSO is a very large kind of floating refinery. It's floating production, storage, offtake. It's the huge ships that enable the production from offshore, and they typically cost $2 to $3, maybe more $billion each.
But not only that, that requires investment infrastructure, so port infrastructure, service providers. It provides lots of opportunities, not only for the shipyards or main operators, but also for the whole industry. We will have lots of growth in electricity because, in this scenario, oil derivatives and oil and gas, they still grow, but electricity goes faster. So what we see is a very high speed growth rate for solar, wind, and batteries in Brazil. Of course, there are some natural gas, bioenergy, but the opportunity by the end of the decade, solar should represent around 10% of power generation in Brazil, which is a fantastic number. You may or may not know that Brazilian energy matrix is already very renewable, 48, 49%, but the electricity matrix in Brazil is 88% renewable in installed capacity. If you look at the numbers of electricity actually generated, last year alone we had 93% of renewable energy in Brazil. If you add nuclear, and that's a big if because some people do not consider nuclear renewable, if you add nuclear, we reach to over 95% renewable electricity. And that number is growing. That's good for investment opportunities in power generation, but it's great for infrastructure. Why? Because what we are seeing in power systems is that the more renewables you get, the more need you have for infrastructure. So storage capacity and transmission lines. So Brazil is investing a lot in contracting transmission lines to be able to manage a system that is increasingly becoming more renewable and more unpredictable.
We've heard about the opportunities. I mentioned some of the evolving regulations. So if you could maybe give us a little bit of what's the sort of the state of where the oil and gas and biofuels industry is now, what keeps you awake at night? And, or maybe what do you spend your time doing? I'm sure, because I'm sure you're dealing with some of these urgent problems that are affecting the industry.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you. This is a big challenge, and I tell you, sometimes it's a real challenge for an industry like ours to show what we are doing in terms of providing energy, not just to Brazil but to the world. I will ask my friends over there in the back if they can just. I have a couple of slides that maybe just to trigger your attention to how challenging it is, this idea of energy transition. This is a picture of the largest plane in the world. Some of you have already flown this big bird. It weighs 460 tons. It can transport 853 people at one of the characterization of this plane. Can go from Dallas to Sydney to Hong Kong to New York City. Can transport this amount of people with 370 to 500 liters of fuel. This is approximately 4 times your tank of your car. What kind of energy can do that? Can cross the world, take you and your luggage and some cargo with so much efficiency? There is no other source of energy that can do that, but the oil, the fuels, the jet fuel in this case that is produced from petroleum. There is another picture, next one. This is the largest container ship in the world, the MSC Irina. Can transport 24,000 20 feet container, can cross over all the oceans, etc. I suggest you that when you finish this session, you go down, you go to any store that is next door, and if you have the chance to check all the merchandise that is showcased in the shelves, you are going to find a lot of, at least parts of those products that were brought to you using this kind of ship. So this is another challenge we have. This uses bunker oil, that is a kind of low quality diesel, and that's the fuel they use to transport those merchandise up to you, to the consumer. Next one, please. And then you have the challenge coming. Sorry for the Portuguese, but this is a global paper in Brazil mentioned that now it's very important that we advance the artificial intelligence using those famous data centers. So this is a issue that we have. The consumption of energy in the world is going to grow 25% up to 2020. So this will trigger the need for 17.4 trillion of investments. So those are the numbers that we are dealing with. So we have to be very balanced in terms of what kind of energy we are going to offer to the world. And the next one is the last one. This is the challenging, the hurdles of the energy transition. We are not familiar with this kind of thing because we don't have snow in Brazil, but you have here in the United States and Canada. So this is a guy that has an electric car. Maybe he's traveling somewhere in the north part of the country and he faced a bliss, and now he's challenging with kind of. So the energy has to be available, has to be an energy that is reliable, that is cheap, and that is sustainable. That's the main issue we have right now. And so in this perspective, I think that we have to be very cautious in terms of how we don't talk in our organization in energy transition. We prefer to use the word energy evolution, because we think that it's more a way of evolving over the necessary energies. As of today, the coal is still here in the United States produce more than 25% of the energy in this country. In China, 43% of the energy comes from coal. In India, the same thing. So those are the challenges we have. We have to be very cautious because we need to make sure that we do not, with all those narratives of a speed energy evolution or energy transition, we create a lot of energy poverty because this is an issue that, especially in countries like Brazil, India, and others.
Let's start with analyzing. I would like to start analyzing the slides from my friend Roberto Ardengue, if you allowed me.
Yes.
He started with a very big aircraft made by aluminium.
Yeah.
Because the weight, this reduce consumption of energy, and this is I cannot lose this opportunity to go to the last slide. Electric cars is a big part of our customers today. Do the quality of aluminium, do the way we produce, attract more this metal in the market. It's good to say that our investments in energy bring this position for us. Because a long time ago, Hydro is a more than 110 years company, as I told before, but we started in energy. So aluminium is a high intensive consumption of consumer of energy. So in Brazil, precisely when you operate in the middle of Amazon, you need to be by principle to be environmentally responsible. So we are investing. We have two companies in Brazil of energy. One about the electricity, and another one is renewables. We call Hydro Rain. And also one company we started some years ago to discuss hydrogen in Norway, and we are now waiting the regulations in Brazil to apply here. I know that in US they start before with a great incentive for this energy, and I think Brazil should follow the path and learn a little bit to promote this energy in Brazil, because we have space for all energies and all investments, right? So I think it's a very good opportunity for us. So we are investing a lot. Carla mentioned our refinery, Alunorte, in Pará State. It's the biggest refinery in the world. So we, in the beginning of this year, we have this energy transition. We changed the energy metrics from oil to gas. So we have a ship there, FRCU, that arrived there, but we use the momentum also to bring gas for Pará State. So we kind of invest, but we become a tool for bringing the energy for other companies, for cars, for everything. So this connection with government and how to promote and how to make better the population around you, precisely in Brazil, is very important. So not only that, but for sure social investments is in this context. So this process to make our energy more clean is will end in the end of this year with electrical boilers that we are using our high technology to bring it for our operation. So before COP, I saw a lot of people talking about projects, pilots, but we are delivering the biggest investment in Brazil, adding to that more two companies, Hydro Renewables. We are investing now into big production of wind power and solar power in Brazil. In the total until now, 80.8 billion reais of investments. That shows the commitment of our industry, mining, and the aluminium with Brazil, with environmental, with development of people. I think this is a proud to say to you guys here that this is our focus and this is how the industry is paying the bill.
So I have some more specific questions that I want to ask the panelists. I'd like to start with Eloisa. So Eloisa gave us a lot of background on how the Brazil energy sector works and the growing number of new sources of energy like solar and wind and biofuels, how they play a role into the energy diversification of Brazil and in the world. So, and I know we have some people here in the audience that is interested in investment in solar energy, other sources of energy in Brazil, because the market is very attractive, and I've seen numbers that the payback in some of those investments is less than 5 years, which makes Brazil very attractive for those new sources. So I'd like Eloisa to comment a little bit on this potential for investments in Brazil, especially in solar, wind, and biofuels.
As I said, Brazilian energy matrix is already very renewable, and if we see total electricity consumption in Brazil, it grows a lot. We could reach between 800 terawatt hours by the end of the decade to 900 terawatt hours. So it's a huge market potential. And part of that growth, and a part that's been gaining momentum is solar, but solar usually attached to the distributed generation. So because of the incentive schemes that there were in Brazil, we saw recently a huge growth of distributed generation in Brazil. That trend should keep going in this next decade. The speed will depend on how on the norms regarding the new laws regarding the distributed generation. So how fast you dephase subsidies, and it is a huge political debate. But again, no matter which path is going to be chosen, there's still a huge increase in this sector and still a very lucrative investment. For household consumption, solar will be one of the main growths in the decade. But then again, that solar will require some sort of balancing of the system. So, and I don't know how many of you follow the Brazilian electricity industry, but if you follow here in the US, kind of the same happens in California and other states, where the highest renewals you have, at some point of the day, you even get like negative prices because you have so many renewables that you actually have to curtail some of the renewable generation or compensate somehow. In the medium and long term, that will require more investments and that will bring more opportunities, both in storage, either batteries or other forms of storage. In Brazil, we are looking into pumped hydro as well as a way to balance the system. But again, huge investments in infrastructure and intelligent systems. So smart grids, smart meters, intelligent systems that allow you to operate a system that is highly complex and that gains complexity over time. Biofuels grow a lot as well. Mainly, and it's very interesting to see that biofuels in Brazil started in the 70s. Not as a sustainability issue, but as an energy security issue. Brazil started its biofuels program with Proálcool, with ethanol, because of the oil shocks. So ethanol was a way to reduce dependency on oil. Over time, it became a solution, a good solution for energy transition. But ethanol, nowadays, with the fuel of the future, traditional ethanol grows in Brazil, and Brazil is opening markets for ethanol around the world. The Global Biofuels Alliance started as that, with Brazil, United States, and India as the founding countries. And the strategy was Brazil and United States are already huge ethanol producers and already believe a lot in the ethanol as a way to decarbonize the transportation sector. But the India case is very interesting. As Ardeng mentioned, India generates 70% of its electricity from coal. And India was almost almost taking a route of electromobility. So trying to tackle energy emissions in transportation through electrification. But if you do that in a country that generates electricity through coal, it's actually worse. Like in the end of the day, if you account the carbon, it's less efficient, you actually just throws more CO2 in the atmosphere. And then Brazil started bilateral conversations with India, and we said, come on, you produce lots of sugar, and you're just wasting bioenergy with the waste. Why don't you do ethanol? And they were like, but what happens with the cold start? And it actually took us a while to understand, for those who remember or who are Brazilians back in the 80s or 70s, cold start, because back then, during cold times, the ethanol cars, they didn't turn on. You needed, I don't know the name, afogador. You needed a small gasoline tank to give the first spark, and then the car would start. That problem was solved early 2000s, so 20 years ago. But apparently, the Indians didn't know that. So, and we started a bilateral cooperation that ended up with India shifting its decarbonization for transportation goals towards biofuels. And India is a huge market. If you see now, they're increasing imports on flex fuel cars and flex hybrid cars. And they're joined the Global Biofuels Alliance, trying to move towards that. But not only ethanol. Ethanol is a first generation fuel. Now we have second generation ethanol. We have biodiesel, HVO, which is a drop-in fuel for diesel motors. All those alternatives, they give you a way to move forward in the energy evolution scenario, without having to have huge investments in technologies and infrastructures. Why is that important? Because if you look globally, some countries, US, they have huge pockets, deep pockets to create systems like the IRA. Norway is great, has more money than people. Absolutely fantastic what you can do when you have lots of money. But if you have, as most developing countries have, if you have a fiscal constraint, bad credit rates, which means that your financing gets very expensive, you have to come up with other solutions if you still want to meet your targets. And this solution is biofuel. So most of the global south, if you look in perspective, is now shifting towards bioenergy. So not only traditional biofuels, but advanced biofuels as a way to try to advance in reducing emissions without having to invest a lot in changing technology or infrastructure in its own country.
And Eloisa mentioned about the critical moment that we're going through this energy transition, and the storage of the electricity produced by those new sources of energy require a lot of critical minerals. And if you take in consideration, Brazil is only one of the few countries in the world that has all the critical minerals that goes into this energy systems, not just automotive, but also stationary, that are used next to the solar power plants. Brazil has the source, has the minerals, but Brazil does not have the capability of processing them. So most of these minerals are going to China, and 80% of the processing of these minerals, critical minerals, are done in China. And that's causing trouble in the United States, because the United States wants to grow the production of automobiles and so on. And there are even discussions between the United States on how to structure some kind of collaboration or an agreement for the exploration and processing of those critical minerals. So if you can comment from your industry perspective, how do you see, and what does the Brazil and the United States need to do to make these agreements possible?
It's not an easy question. Critical minerals, aluminum is one of them. So I can say a little bit more about how we are proceeding here in Brazil about the this one. As I mentioned, we are investing a lot in energy because it's essential for our production. And the collaboration we are doing, for example, in the Pará state, we are opening the door for gas for Pará, but we are also discussing in Brazil how we can improve the source of energy in the country and in the state. You need to do something. Sometimes through associations, sometimes you need to set the example how to do that. So because of that, we are investing in other states to have the wind power, to have the solar power, in order to mitigate not only our consumption, because it's very high, but also to reduce the emissions. So for sure, as a worldwide company, we can do it in Norway, we can do it in the US, and we are working together in order to identify possibilities, how to invest. And another thing is the customers, not only the automotive. To have a clean energy will become, in my book, will become a need. It's not optional. It's not because you will have a good marketing. It's not because you can have a credit, carbon credit. It is because it's essential for the world, the climate change. So this is what we are working with the values to make it better and better the way we operate, the way we be part of the society, because without that, you cannot survive in the near future. So this is the responsible way we are trying to drive, set an example. And another thing, we should be transparent, because today with the speed of the information, fake news, narratives, you need to put your face there and be transparent. Anyone can say we are perfect. No, we have our challenges, we have our problems, but you need to put your face and try to solve with the society. I can say that in a very comfortable way, because in my region we have everything some people saw in the university or the MBAs. I have indigenous, I have quilombolas, I have land invasion, I have poor people. So we need, as a responsible company, work with the authorities to do the best for everyone, to try to drive with training, with education. We are doing, I mentioned before, the social investments, because you cannot grow without people around you grow and understand better how it works. So, but the mining industry, polluting, deforestation, we are responsible for 0.01% of deforestation. But if you not put your face there to discuss, anyone will know. No one will know about that. So how can you do that in a transparent way? Put in a discussion, discuss numbers, discuss alternatives, how you be better for all of us, how to produce a win-win process. So this is the way we are working. We don't have the formula, but we are humble enough to understand we are not expert in everything. We need friends, we need the cooperation, we need to work with university, with the experts, NGOs, everyone that can support.
We need to talk a little bit about the fiscal reform in Brazil and how this affects. Maybe he doesn't want to answer, but briefly, if you could just mention a few facts and how Brazil is being affected, not just in conventional energy, but also in biofuels and renewables.
Yeah, the fiscal reform is key for our business, for every business in Brazil. I'm looking here for Paulo Vieira da Cunha and the previous members of the previous panels. One of the big issues we have in Brazil, together with all this fiscal deficit and public budget, is productivity. The Brazilian economy is lagging behind many other countries in terms of productivity. We have not been growing the productivity for 40 years already. So it's a disaster. And one reason is the tax, the incredible complex tax system we have in the country. And I'm going to tell a very brief history. A year ago, I received a visit from one CEO of one small oil company. He has started a business in Brazil with some funds from abroad. And what we do when you start oil business in Brazil, you go to the oil and gas regulator, the ANP, you acquire the rights for some areas. He have acquired the rights for 4 areas, different areas, and then you hire the geologists and geophysics, the people that are going to look at the area. They are going to see the seismic maps and are going to find the oil, because that's the start of the business. If they don't find the oil, they don't drill. If have to locate an area where they can drill a well and find oil and gas. And he said, hey, you know, Roberto, I'm amazing with Brazil. I have started this business here, and after 4 years, I have more accountants and lawyers than geologists and geophysics. I spend more time paying my taxes than looking at the business that I have to do in this country. So this is the situation we have in Brazil. Take, for instance, the difference of tax levels in different states. São Paulo is a big ethanol producer. Ethanol is a big energy source for cars in Brazil. 27.5% of the Brazilian gasoline is made with ethanol. Not to mention the pure ethanol that you can put in your cars, because 9% of the Brazilian cars are flex cars. So São Paulo puts 12% of tax in the ethanol. Rio de Janeiro, 25% of tax in the ethanol. What happened? Every day during the night, 500 trucks cross the border from São Paulo to Rio, bringing ethanol to Rio de Janeiro markets, in the black market, because this is very competitive. So that's the issue we are talking about, more productivity. So fiscal reform is key for not just for our industry, but for the rest of the country.
But I would really like to thank the panelists. Please, a round of applause for them.
Well, with that, I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank our partners from Bratec for being here, for making the trip from Houston. A great 2 panels here today, I think, showing all the opportunities as well as all the challenges that we have of doing business in Brazil, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So thanks very much. Thanks for sticking with us. I know we went a little long. And John, I don't know if you have any final words from your side as well.
It's been a great visit here in New York. I really congratulate Carla and the panelists. And this morning, it was just enlightening. Thank you so much for the warm reception. We really appreciate it. Come down, visit us in Texas. Thank you.